Well, I'm not sure I have any wisdom at all, but it'll be fun to try to verbalize what may or may not be wisdom. Aging is a process and is filled with crises. Some of them are very funny, and some of them are very sad. And we have to embrace the crises of life. You can't hide from them because they're there, but you have to stand tall and say yes to whatever comes, not hiding, and then cope with it. And the coping with it is a long and arduous process, but a great deal of fun and joy as well. Well, that's a bit of a divine mystery. Kathleen got dementia, and I found that my heart was full with joy, and I have more joy with every day. And I love Jesus more every day. I love Kathleen more every day, my family, and everybody who comes into my purview. That has to be from heaven. I can't create that. That's not possible. It's rather much like salvation. I can't create my own salvation. Just like the Israelites couldn't create the crossing of the sea. That wasn't possible, but God did it, and that's what he does. Well, I wonder if it doesn't go back to God's faithfulness, his grace. Yes, we've had terrible things happen in our family. I suppose my daughter Cherith has had more problems than any of my children or their families. She says almost nothing about it. She goes right on. If she's going through a crisis, she may talk about it, she may not. But when she does talk about it, she says very little and then has a good laugh. And I try to think up a funny story from my memory bank, and we have a good laugh. And she keeps going. She doesn't back off. She doesn't say, oh, I feel terrible today, therefore I'm not going to work. Once in a while she stays home from work, but boy, she's got emotional and spiritual muscle. And that's of grace. Where else does it come from? Now, my other children have also had very serious problems, and I notice they just keep going. And that's of grace. The older I get, the more I'm convinced that all is of grace. In the theology classroom, we put on the chalkboard, sola gratia, by grace alone. And that's what life is. I didn't ask to be born. I didn't know what salvation was until I crossed the sea with the Israelites. And little by little, I discovered what salvation is, because it grows and develops and gets larger and larger. And after a while, you see that even the tragedies of life are grace, because Romans 8:28 is an absolutely true verse. All things, not some things, all things work together for good. And by the way, it's to those who love the Lord. And even the love of the Lord is his gift, which is all very interesting and wonderful to live with. Now, I can say a lot more, but you go ahead and ask more questions. Oh, I don't believe in retirement. There are two problems about the word retirement, Old Testament and New Testament. The word does not occur in either Old Testament or New Testament, and I don't see any reason why I should retire. I love work, and so I write every day when the Lord gives me permission to, and right now it's every day.
When your wife.
And when my wife says yes, and I've trained her to say yes most of the time. And I love people. I love to counsel as a lay counselor. I'm not a trained counselor. Though sometimes I wonder if I'm not better trained than the professional counselors, because I just live by common sense. I used to be grumpy and find little things bigger than they really are. And I got to associating with people who were positive, and I got to learning that positivity is an expression of faith. Well, I didn't want to be left out of the picture, and so I read Norman Vincent Peale, and I listened to Joel Osteen. I don't bother much with the theological problems in positive thinkers like that. I just say I know I need to be positive, and when I'm positive, I feel good. When I get grumpy, well, I feel grumpy. Well, I'm sure lots of them have. I've loved the mystics and the fathers of the church. I suppose St. Francis stands out as my model. He lived to be only in his 40s, but he knew how to live. And the essence of his living was giving. He tells the most astonishing stories, like the one about taking his disciples and going from place to place in the course of a day and begging bread and trying to be nice to people and all of the rest. But he had announced at the outset of the day that they were going to go into town and back home preaching the gospel. But when they got back, one of the disciples said, I thought we were going to preach the gospel. And St. Francis said, yes, we did every step of the way. Use words only if necessary. So it was his life. You know, St. Paul says, pray without ceasing. Well, that's the way you pray without ceasing. And it's a blessed way to live. Well, if ever you needed prayers now, oh dear. You have so many crises, so many problems. They range from money to physical health. And if you get to focusing on those negatives, you've got a problem, because you become the big negative, far more negative than the negatives that have challenged you. If you want to live beyond that, for goodness sake, see what's good in everything. And there always is some good in everything. When I taught preaching, we had great fun in our practicums. And even though some of the sermons were really very bad, I refused to use that language. Well, what I did was to find what was good. And there's always something good in every sermon you hear. Some of my listeners won't believe that, but that's true. There's always something good in every sermon. So I focus on that, and then I go to the negatives, because people have to face their negatives. But if they face their negatives with a positive spirit, they can overcome them. But they sure can't. You know, I could have ruined a lot of people who were studying for ministry by jumping all over them negatively. And I'm afraid some professors of speech have done that, which is very sad to me. You can ruin somebody, just demolish their self-esteem. I refuse to do that. Now, maybe you've given me the title for my next book, The Theology of Tea. I love that title. That is just too good. Well, have you noticed how often the word rest appears in the book of Psalms and in the book of Hebrews? And notice how Jesus says to his disciples, let's come apart and rest a while. And the Sabbath, the Sabbath, is a day of rest. Rest is very important to God, and we need to remember that. So we lived in the British Isles for a long time, and early on, we noticed that everybody stopped their work at 4 o'clock. What were they doing at 4 o'clock? We never stopped work at 4 o'clock in the States. Well, they stopped for tea. And we had some of the most delicious pastry items for tea you could ever imagine, some you couldn't imagine, and a lovely cup of tea. And after we came home, we decided this was a wonderful thing to keep going. And we've had thousands of people in our home sitting at our tea table or tables, and we love it. It's a rest, it's a time to laugh and rehearse. You know, you can avoid going to the psychotherapist if you have tea, because you get it all off your chest at tea time and you don't have to pay for it. Well, I do, because I host these tea times. My bills are just ridiculous. Yeah, I find that I need people. And sometimes I get up in the morning and nobody's invited to tea, and I try to see if I can find somebody who would like to come to tea. I love people, which is such an interesting thing. By the way, I did not love people. I loved books prior to the infilling of the Spirit. that was a big point of change in my life. Years ago, in the early 1960s, I found out I love people and I can't live without them. And interestingly, God has a sense of humor, you know. I found out I love dogs. Now, I did not like dogs prior to the filling of the Spirit. I liked myself, and I was full of myself. I was afraid of dogs because they might get their hairs on my clothes. Oh, what a silly thing. Now I find that dogs are absolutely wonderful. I love life. I can hardly wait to get up in the morning. That's the way it was when I did my PhD thesis. I could hardly wait to get up in the morning to see what I would learn in my research. And I did my research on John Newton, who wrote Amazing Grace. Well, I feel the same today. I can hardly wait to get up in the morning and see what's going to happen. Because God always gives us surprises. I often tell people that God's middle name is surprise. And life is absolutely full and wonderful. So I don't want to die. On the other hand, I can hardly wait for heaven. I'm just a little bit tired of all the crises that come in old age. Some of them are just downright nasty. And I'd like to get rid of all that nastiness. So I've got a contradictory thing going on inside of me about death and dying and heaven. Ryan, do you know this story about the man who had one hair? He had one hair right in the top of his head. Otherwise, he was completely bald. And he was very proud of that hair, that single hair. He went to the barber to have it trimmed regularly. He oiled it. He massaged the scalp around it. He combed it. He brushed it. And one morning, he awakened and saw the hair on his pillow. He threw up his hands and said, "Oh, my word, I'm bald."